Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Happy Dynamic Harmlessness Day, which is November 2nd, celebrated each year at the American Vegan Society in honor of the birthday of American Vegan Society founder Jay Dinshah. Welcome today to the first installment in a series, the Vegan Ethics series of the American Vegan Society. First in a series, and our program today is entitled Jay Dinshah's Ahimsa, Dynamic Harmlessness in the 21st Century. So we have a really dynamic panel assembled. We're going to be in conversation on the topic of Jay's conception of dynamic harmlessness, how that applies and informs his approach to veganism, and how that can in turn inform our vegan advocacy in the 21st century. So I'm going to begin by introducing our panelists. First, we have Freya Dinshah, and if folks can just raise their hand because we appear differently on everyone's screen. So Freya is the longtime president of the American Vegan Society. Victoria Moran, an acclaimed author, filmmaker, and founder of Main Street Vegan Academy. Saurabh Dalal, who is not on the screen now, SF Dalal, is a longtime vegan activist, longtime volunteer leader, including serving on the boards of Farm Sanctuary, Farm, and is currently the treasurer of the Veg Society of DC. And Lee Hall. Lee is an author and founder of Vegan Place, the Art of Animal Liberation. Welcome to you all, and thank you for your participation today on this very special event. And what I'd like to do is begin with the folks, beginning with Freya, folks who knew Jay and can share about his life and work in a way that many of us aren't aware on a personal level, because we did not have the good fortune to know Jay. So obviously we'll start with Freya, remembrances of Jay, and please, all the time you need.
Okay, ready to go?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Jay was a pen friend of mine, so that's how I first met him, with letters going back and forth across the Atlantic. He was very sure of his beliefs, which were his principles of what was right and what was wrong. He was non-sectarian, but he was rooted in doing the right thing. Jay did not belong to any church or religion. He felt it didn't matter what religion or what the person's politics were, so long as they were the better for it. And he would say that any religious system or political system would work well if it was run by someone who was a good person. Jay was knowledgeable about scriptures. His family had a theosophical tradition. His father was born in Bombay, now Mumbai, India, and he was a Parsi Zoroastrian. And he came to the United States, well, a couple of times, but he was well settled by the 1920s. So the Parsi Zoroastrians, the Zoroastrian faith has the phrase, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. And so that was fundamental to the way the family would think about things. Also, the Zoroastrian faith has very strict rules about hygiene, which were followed. Jay's mother was American. She was German-American, and she was born in Orange, New Jersey. And she was the second wife of Jay's father. So his father had a daughter who was about the same age as his second wife. When I was getting to know Jay, his younger brother, Noshavan, there were 7 brothers altogether. Noshavan was studying Buddhism, And Jay was very impressed with the compassionate teachings of the Buddha, which extended to animals and not just talking about. Now, I personally came from a non-church going family, but we did have Christian religious instruction in school. As I grew up, I started exploring other religions, and Buddhism appealed to me too. So I was writing to Jay when I was 17 and 18. And around that time, I was reading Mahatma Gandhi's My Experiments with Truth, which I introduced to Jay, and he really devoured everything that Gandhi had to say, as you may realize already or will realize soon. On the vegetarian front, both of our families were vegetarian. In England, I belong to an ovo-lacto vegetarian family, which means that we ate eggs and milk and cheese and so forth. Jay's vegetarian family was vegetarian in the Indian tradition. They did not use any eggs, but they did use milk, and they made their own soft cheese out of milk. Jay's father had become vegetarian as a young man for ethical and for health reasons, but he always felt it was necessary to drink cow's milk, and we were never able to persuade him otherwise. So, what did I eat in my vegetarian family? Along with the cow's milk and cheese, we had a lot of fruits and fresh vegetables and beans and grains and so on. He enjoyed whole wheat bread, and go-to meals were things like beans on toast or mushrooms on toast, and baked or boiled potatoes, Brussels sprouts and runner beans from the garden. Now, I know people say that English food is dull and boring, but ours was fresh from the garden and conservatively cooked, and it was just lovely. We grew apples and pears and rhubarb, which I used with oats and dried fruit and nuts to make usually for breakfast very often. That was my favorite then, and it's still my favorite breakfast now. Now, in Jay's family, their main meal centered around rice and dal. Dal is a split pea curry, and Jay would send me recipes of how to make dal, and I would cook it for my friends when we were camping, and got introduced to quite a few of the foods that their family made, and more so when I came to America, and I had the opportunity to work in the kitchen with his mother and learn about how they prepared their food, which was somewhat different to ours. Their food was, they used a lot more salt than we did. My mother only used a light pinch of salt, but Jay's family used salt more heavily, and spices that I wasn't used to, but I got to know them and enjoy them. And Jay's mother was, of course, knew how to make cakes without eggs, and that was good to know. Jay was experimenting in the kitchen too, and well, they had a family tradition previously of eating a quart of Breyers ice cream on Saturday night. So he couldn't do that anymore. Now he'd become vegan, and so he was making a banana ice cream by mixing bananas and cashew nuts in the blender and then freezing them, and then enjoying the ice cream the next day. Jay had become vegan by the time I started writing to him. He was influenced by health teachers in this country, including Dr. Shelton, who said that animal foods were second-hand foods. He was strongly influenced by Geoffrey Rudd, who was secretary of the Vegetarian Society in Manchester, England. And Geoffrey Rudd wrote a book called Why Kill for Food, which Jay liked so much he imported it and sold it by mail order, putting classified ads in magazines and newspapers. And then he was also corresponding with people in the Vegan Society. And you'll see something about that if you look back in old issues of the Vegan in the late 50s. And some of that is interesting to read. Jay was always someone, he could do a lot of things. He was, my mother said he was a jack of all trades and master of none. But he would always do what needed to be done. So when he started producing the magazine, the American Vegan Society magazine, which he named Ahimsa, it was copied on a mimeograph machine. We used to type it up on an old Underwood typewriter on a stencil, which was a wax stencil. And then we print it off and send it out. Sometimes the first issue was just one page, I think, front and back. Anyway, when he introduced veganism, which, as you know, people can become vegan for many different reasons. So when the Vegan Society started in England, their main argument for being vegan seemed to be that it was unnatural for people, it was unnatural for any animal past the age of weaning to drink the milk of another species. And to illustrate that fact, they had a picture of a man lying under a cow and suckling milk from the cow's udder to show how ridiculous it was for people to be drinking milk. So, various reasons for being vegan. A lot of people choose to be vegan for their health, for aesthetic reasons. You know, that killing animals is very unpleasant, and you know, the blood around animals is not nice. Which and also there are economic reasons. Benjamin Franklin, for instance, when he was vegetarian, which was on and off in his life, would argue for the economies of being vegetarian. And on a larger scale, environmental reasons are a very good reason to be vegan. When I was a child and a vegetarian, I was vegetarian because I didn't want to kill the animals. And that, I think, is a very good basic reason for a lot of people, a lot of children. They don't want to kill the animals. Other people, you know, get into it because their health's failing and they find it a solution to health problems. So when Jay introduced veganism to Americans in this country, he introduced it as a moral choice. And the first article in the first issue of Ahimsa was a matter of motives. So as I was saying that Jay was very much do-it-yourself person. He didn't rely on other people, and we couldn't afford to pay other people to do things. So when we began to produce books, for instance, we printed them on the mimeograph, we collated the pages, we stapled the pages together, and then he went somewhere and had the pages trimmed. Jay liked to speak. He was a good speaker. He had some experience with that in the past. His father was a health lecturer teaching an alternative therapy, so Jay had someone to model himself after. And he had a good, strong voice, so he said he didn't need a microphone. And to spread the word about veganism, he organized lecture tours. And we went on a lecture tour across the country, all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. And he arranged to speak at different groups who invited him and would give us hospitality. So these groups would be vegetarian groups in different cities, animal welfare groups, philosophical groups, health groups, gardening clubs, a variety of places would invite him to speak. And we traveled in a 56 Chrysler DeSoto wagon. We took the mimeograph in the back and cranked out the magazine on the way, because it took some months to go all the way back and forth. So when we landed in California, that was our opportunity to meet vegan pioneers such as Dr. Catherine Nimmo, who was from Holland and came to the United States in about 1948, I believe. And well, I'm not sure about that fact, but anyway, she became vegan at or before the Vegan Society was founded, and she would import their magazine and distribute it to people that she knew and corresponded with. And Ruben Abramowitz was an early vegan. He had maintained a vegan diet as a conscientious objector during the Second World War when he was in prison. And Dr. Pietro Rotondi was in Los Angeles. He wrote Vegetarian Cookery. It did use honey, but apart from that, it didn't have animal ingredients. And that cookbook was way ahead of its time. So we had the opportunity to talk and learn from many people in those days. We also met the Seventh-day Adventists, a number of whom were vegan, and they did very important studies on the health of vegetarians and vegans compared to the general population. So I've probably talked enough right now. Have I, Philip? Is it time to move on to someone else?
Thank you, Freya. Sure, we can certainly move on. I know, Victoria, my understanding is that you were in attendance at the seminal event, what's become a seminal event in history, the 1975 World Vegetarian Congress event. So I'm certainly interested in hearing about your perspectives and your relationship with Jay, including that major event in the history of the contemporary movement.
Oh, thanks so much. And thanks for having me. I think I know that I wouldn't be vegan if it weren't for Jay, and I might not be alive because I had a serious binge eating disorder in my youth, and it was tough. And I can't say that going vegan and knowing Jay took care of all of it. I also got into a 12-step program and recovered from the inside out. But I believe that were it not for knowing about this way of eating, and were it not for knowing Jay and Freya, who never gave up on me, because I was a slipping and sliding vegan. You know, I'd be vegan for weeks or months, and I'd think, I'm vegan. And then I would fall off the wagon and I'd just be completely devastated and have a very hard time sometimes getting back on. But I cherish that both Jay and Freya always treated me like a vegan. It's like, you know, you're here. And when somebody sees you in a certain way, you have to live up to that because you just can't disappoint them. And even if it takes a while, that's certainly what happened to me. So we were told for this presentation to look at Jay's Pillars of Ahimsa. And so I just want to go through those and kind of relate some of my experiences with Jay to the pillars. The conference that you mentioned was in 1975. I actually met Jay in 1970. I'd started corresponding. I'd been living in England and I became vegetarian there. And well, I guess I became pescatarian because I cooked meat for a Thanksgiving when I got back to the States. And that was the last time I ever cooked meat. That was 1969. I'm not sure how I learned about the Vegan Society, because when I was in the UK, even though the Vegan Society was there, I didn't know about it. I was reading some Vegetarian Society literature, and there was a line that said there are people called vegans, and they don't eat eggs or dairy because they don't want to interfere with the sexual lives of animals. And I remember thinking, well, that's very nice, but it's hard enough to be vegetarian. So I'm just going to leave that alone. But somehow I found out about the American Vegan Society and got all the literature. So As we look at the first pillar, abstaining from animal products, in my life, Jay's writings and Freya's cookbook were veganism. That was the ultimate. I had read the book that Freya mentioned. I probably got it from the American Vegan Society, Why Kill for Food? But the whole concept of veganism as an ethical imperative came to me directly from Jay and Freya. And I remember going over and over and over all that literature and marking it up so much so they couldn't read it, and then ordering it over again and hanging on every word. And every time that the magazine was a few days late, I would be like, I'm looking in the mailbox, where is my magazine? Because it was just so meaningful. Then when I met Jay the first time, I was living at the Theosophical Society headquarters in Illinois, and Jay came out, and the older people there at the Theosophical Society had decided that they'd already given up enough. They weren't going to give up eggs and dairy too. But the young people, including Nathaniel Altman, who wrote a seminal book, actually the first book on vegetarianism to come from a regular publisher in the 20th century, his book, Eating for Life. But we were there when Jay came, and we hung on every word. And the way Jay presented veganism and these pillars, that it was the essence of spiritual tradition. It was the essence of moral philosophy. It was really the only rational way to live at a time when it was just weird as hell. I mean, being vegetarian was very, very odd. And the idea that there were people doing what Jay and Freya were doing was beyond comprehension for most people. And yet, those of us who saw what they were doing, who read what this was all about, and who started doing it ourselves, there was just no turning back. So the second pillar of Ahimsa, harmlessness with reverence for life, that one introduced me to a kind of controversial side of Jay, because I remember having a conversation with him once and mentioning, pro-choice, all that, a young liberal woman. And Jay told me that he absolutely did not believe that abortion was an ethical thing to do. I was horrified. I mean, I don't think I'd ever met anybody that had that view, but he backed it up with principles of reverence for life. And I always admired him because he didn't care what the other person thought. They could think what they wanted to think, but he was going to tell you what he thought and why. The next one is integrity of thought, word, and deed. And I really saw that in Jay, not so much the first time I met him, because then I was just in awe and kind of standing back and listening to him speak. But the second time that I came to know Jay was 1972 or 73. I was living in my hometown of Kansas City, in, I guess, what you would call a commune. It was a beautiful, old house from the 1800s, totally falling down. Now, another thing about Jay is he had a wry wit. He even had a kind of rough wit. And he was staying in this house that I thought was just kind of magical and romantic and amazing because it was so old and kind of falling apart. And while he was there, I don't know if the plumbing went out. I think it was the plumbing. Maybe it was the electricity. Maybe it was both. And I was saying to him, because I knew we both had a connection to England. I'd gone to school there. And I said to Jay, well, it's sort of like England. He said, this isn't like England. This is like India. And after his presentation that night, some of us walked him out to his car where he was going to take off into the night. And it was a different car. It wasn't the van. It was a small car. And he had made the back seat into a bed. And he got in that little car and drove off. And I remember thinking, this is the latter day John the Baptist. This is the voice in the wilderness. And I've just never had so much admiration for anybody in my life. Mastery over oneself, that's the next pillar. And as I said, he was never like wishy-washy. He was always very stringent about this is what you have to do, this is what you have to be. But he still had patience for me to get there because I had no mastery when it came to the food thing. And I remember one time he said to me, and this would just be so just terrible these days. And he said to me, well, you actually are quite a pretty young woman. There's just too much of you. A lot of people could never gotten by with that. With Jay, it's sort of like, yeah, I know. Then service to humanity, nature, and creation. That was really what Jay did. And not only did he do it, but he inspired other people to do it. And when I visited Jay and Freya at their home, this Gandhian connection that he had, and I didn't know until this evening, Freya, that he got that from you. I mean, he really tried to emulate this satyagraha way of living in everything that he did. And he also was very strategic. When they were coming up with the idea for the North American Vegetarian Society so that 1975 conference could happen, and he determined that he would send Sharon and Brian Graff off to start this vegetarian society, I just remember thinking, this is so selfless. You know, he's taking a piece out of the American Vegan Society, which was his baby, to start this other thing. And I'm looking at it as, well, you know, this is going to be competition. But he could so see the bigger picture. And they wouldn't have the International Vegetarian Union Congress here unless we had a vegetarian society. So he did that. And then finally, the last pillar, advancement of understanding and truth. I loved it that even though Jay wasn't specifically religious, meaning following a religion, and I think it was probably good that he wasn't, because then he could speak for all of them. But for me, what he was talking about packaged the essence of spirituality, of that kind of spirituality that Aldous Huxley talked about in the perennial philosophy, that inside all the outer trappings, there is this beautiful mystical truth at the core of all wisdom traditions. And none of them gets all of it, but kind of all together, you know, they get quite a bit. And Jay just got so much and brought so much. And I'm just so sorry that he is not here with us in the flesh, but I'm pretty sure he's with us. Thank you, Jay, and happy birthday.
Victoria, thanks so much. That was beautiful. So appreciate it. Next, if we could hear from Saurabh, who also had a personal relationship with Jay and Freya, and is very kindly dialing in from outside of Chennai in Southeast India. Tribute to his commitment and to AVS, and as an advisor. All of our panelists are either officers in Freya's case or advisors to the organization. I neglected to mention that. So I'm going to turn it over to Saurabh. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Sure. Hi. Thank you, Philip, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Okay, I'll proceed and I'll try and check in. So, hello, everyone. It's well, good morning and good evening to you. It is an honor and thrill to be here, and I am in the country of Jay's father's birth, which is India, and I'm just outside of Chennai in a town called Kanchipuram. So, due to bandwidth concerns, I'll be staying on audio only, and I'll check in occasionally just to make sure the connection is still okay. Philip, still okay?
Still okay, sorry, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so one, I'd say it's fitting that Jay's birthday is today in the US, November 2nd, and we know that World Vegan Day is November 1st, and so happy World Vegan Day, one day belated, and it's also World Vegan Month, so very fitting. And I met Jay numerous times in the 1990s, especially since we worked on several conferences together that were the AVS and at the time Vegetarian Union of North America that I was involved in. And many of you might remember my close friend, Madge Darneal, and she's from the DC area and previously from England. And so she had been friends with Freya and Jay for many years, and that was my introduction to them, and so and also to ABS. And that's also through Madge is how I became involved locally, and then also in Pune, and then in the International Vegetarian Union, which is why I'm in India right now because we're doing our World Vegan Festival there. So I had felt, an immediate friendship with both Jay and Freya because of the emphasis on ahimsa, and which of course is central to the Jain religion, which is the one that I grew up in. And having become vegan in 1991, it naturally became a passion for me. And seeing people like Jay and Freya and so many others, who were involved in organizing and promoting the message was so motivating for me, really inspiring to see how much individuals can do. And so I really, give thanks to Jay and Freya for being such a great force in my life and showing me how individuals can do so much to promote something so important. No doubt that Jay left us far too early in 2000, but I remember Jay in many ways, and just a few recollections I have is that Jay was very clever and very witty and also headstrong and incredibly passionate, dedicated in promoting the importance of veganism in terms of a diet and the lifestyle. And so Jay brought, many years of organizing experience when I met him in the early 90s, and also the practicality where he just was able to ensure that when we did conferences that the planning could be pulled off, and also it was done in ways that were economical, really made sense. So he was, idealistic, but also so practical. I remember that he was just knowledgeable about so many things, and he worked with his hands, and he spent time to know how things work. And that's really literally, he built things and fixed things, and that applies to getting things done organizationally. I think he built the American Vegan Society and the vegan movement, starting here in North America, and really how you move it along and how you make things happen. No doubt Jay was tireless in all of his efforts. He's a prolific writer, as evidenced by the books and all the articles, in AVS over the first 40 years. And no doubt he enjoyed speaking too. I remember when he mentioned to me that he had given talks on 5 continents. That was the first time anyone had ever told me that. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then the thing I remember a lot is these late night conversations with him. And several occasions when we were at the AVS headquarters in Malaga, there were always some people who stayed up late, like me, and then others who didn't. Philosophical and ethical nature, but there's always this passion of trying to decide what was right. And so that's probably one of my fondest memories is just staying up late nights with Jay and a few others and just talking about all sorts of things and really trying to come to a place where, what was the right thing to do. And that's how I, remember Jay, and I'm inspired by Jay and Freya. And Philip, I'm going to pause here as the first part I thought was going to be more of a personal reflection, and then we would talk about perhaps the Pillars of Ahimsa afterwards. Does that make sense?
That's great. And thank you, Saurabh. Wonderful. Fantastic. And yes, you are correct. We'll circle back and we're going to use some comments from our next panelist, Lee Hall, who, like myself and many others, I assume, unfortunately, did not have the opportunity to meet Jay in person, as you 3 obviously had personal relationships with him. So Lee is one of the more dedicated vegan activists that I know, and very of a scholarly turn, and took this opportunity to do an analysis of the pillars, which she's going to share slides with us and comment on her analysis of the pillars, which we'll use as kind of a springboard to the second part that Saurabh alluded to, of looking at how we as a movement can use Jay's great work in the Pillars of Ahimsa and the foundational contents therein to really make a strong and impactful vegan movement today and in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who will share her screen.
All right, let me see if I can start sharing here. How are we doing? Did we get a first screen up on the,
We have a screen up.
and we have the screen up. All right, as Philip said, I'm Lee. I'm honored to be here tonight. I did not know Jay, we never met. However, and I said to Philip, I could do a sliver, but I really, since we didn't meet, I can't say much. But I am learning about the Pillars of Ahimsa because you talked to me about this, and Philip said, yeah, it's sort of like the idea of having a bridge, isn't it, to the next generations. We are the people who have not met Jay, but most people following us have not met Jay. So the way I met Jay was only through Jay's work with Ahimsa and veganism. And so that is what I'm bringing, I think, in a way, bridging to people in the future who will only know H.J. Dinshah in the way that we do today, which is studying this work of J. Dinshah. And the Pillars of Ahimsa are 6, of course, and it's A-H-I-M-S-A. A for abstaining from animal products, H for harmlessness with reverence for life, I for integrity of thought, word, and deed, as Freya brought up earlier. That was part of Jay's upbringing, the importance of the integrity of thought, word, and deed. M, mastery over oneself. S, service to humanity, nature, and creation. And finally, the second A, the final A, it's what we're doing tonight, advancement of understanding and truth. And I pull up this from 1951. Now, this is the, I hope you can see the URL on the top of the screen. Can you? Because I have a bar, so I want to make sure you can see that. And that way, if you'd like to put it up on your actual computer, you can go ahead and see it. And this is from 1951. The International Vegetarian Union reprinted it. And it's veganism defined as the early vegans defined it in 1951. The long form version of the definition, which was signed by Leslie Cross, who was then vice president of the Vegan Society and publishing it on the Vegan Society's behalf. Why bring this up from 1951? Well, I was at the American Vegan Center recently, and we were there for a poetry reading. And one of the poets who was at the American Vegan Center for this poetry reading told us about this idea called braided poetry. So you take 2 poems, and if they go nicely together, you put them together and you make another poem out of them by braiding them together. And I said, you know, Phil, I wonder if that would work with the early vegans' definition of veganism with Jay's Pillars of Ahimsa. So we said, let's see how it goes. And let's braid this as a poem, a braided poem. And we go back to 1951, and we see on the line that's highlighted, the object of the society shall be to end the exploitation of animals by man, or as we say today, humanity. And the word veganism shall mean the doctrine that humanity should live without exploiting other animals. And so that takes us back to abstaining, right? And I'm going to try to move the screen. Yes, so abstaining. And H.J. Dinshah said this is a meaningful, positive, highly practical manifestation of the inward principle of attitude of kinship with all life. It brings positive benefits to the abstainer, the animals, and the fellow humans when contact. So it's abstaining, but actually it turns out to be positive and full of benefits to us, the other animals, and our fellow humans. And so braiding together with the 1951 definition. The society pledges itself in pursuance of its object to seek to end the use of animals by humanity for food, commodities, work, hunting, vivisection, and all other uses involving exploitation of animal life by humans. So you see here, abstaining from animal products. And we see it read broadly through veganism. What are animal products? Well, they're food, any commodities, the work of animals, hunted animals. Vivisection is also an animal product, right? All uses of animals involving exploitation are the animal products we avoid. Harmlessness with reverence for life. That's the H in Ahimsa, harmlessness with reverence for life. And Jay said, humans having the most power on earth must use that power ethically and benevolently, not mindlessly running amok, killing and destroying, creating fear and hatred, and leaving degradation and death in its wake. And I thought, imagine Jay turning on the television today. What would Jay see today? Mindless creatures running amok, killing and destroying, creating fear and hatred, and leaving degradation and death in its wake. That's exactly what we see when we turn on the television, right? And so this pillar of Ahimsa, harmlessness and reverence for life, is what really needs to be with humanity now. If we are going to survive, basically, if the earth is going to survive, what we're doing now is the exact opposite. And it just goes to show how important this work is, the Pillars of Ahimsa are, in politics, in education, in communication, in events when we get together to talk about these things is so very important. Reverence for life, I looked up the etymology of reverence, and I found respect, deference, esteem heightened by awe. And if that were our view to the other living communities, right, to the other life populating nature, we would know then that we really never had the right to take the most power on earth. We stepped out of our lane to take the most power on earth. Integrity, I. The I in Ahimsa. Thought, word, and deed. So we think the thought, we talk the talk, and we walk the walk. Jay said, in Ahimsa, we walk toward the state wherein there is truth, justice, and kindness in all that we think, say, and do. We should not condone dishonesty, corruption, hypocrisy in ourselves. We should not do something we know to be cruel or wrong merely because it seems to be profitable or efficacious at the moment. So this is a pillar of obviously positive values with right thinking and right speaking, laying the solid foundation for right action. Integrity is thinking the thought, speaking the word, and walking the walk. And braiding it together in 1951 with Veganism Defined. They wrote, defining veganism, the early vegans, veganism is itself a principle from which certain practices logically flow, the deeds. So if the vegan principle, for example, is applied to diet, it can be at once seen why it must be vegetarian in the strictest sense, right? In India, they say the pure vegetarians, right? Also, Philip has said the Buddhist tradition, which Philip studies, also says pure vegetarian, and why it cannot contain any foods derived from animals. And of course, here they are talking in 1951 to who? The vegetarians. That was where they came from, the vegetarians. So here they are saying, to truly understand vegetarianism in its purest sense, it would mean it cannot contain any foods derived from animals. That's taking the principle and applying it to a particular practice. J. Dinshah, Pillars of Ahimsa. The fourth letter is M. This is the only place master appears, And significantly, Jay talks about mastery over oneself. Ahimsa guides us in transcending our egocentric lower, rougher nature and brings forth the finer, higher self. Instead of a me first attitude with materialism and selfishness, we have enlightenment and understanding. All right, so mastery not over others, but over oneself. Is oneself plural? Obviously not, it's oneself, but on a collective scale, right? If humanity becomes a vegan humanity, then we become oneself. And so the mastery is over ourselves. How then would we be managing and assigning ourselves stewardship over all the stuff, all the living communities, right, who are far beyond our scope? Life on Earth is 4 billion years old. Multicellular organisms appeared 570 million years ago. It took 200 million more years for life to populate the land, waters with pollinators, forests, mammals, birds, and fishes. How dare we think that we have the control over all other living communities on Earth? We need to master ourselves as a living community, as a human community. Getting towards the end here of the braiding of the two poems, we're down at the bottom of Veganism Defined. Veganism is not so much welfare as liberation for the creatures and for the mind and heart of humanity, not so much an effort to make the present relationship bearable as an uncompromising recognition that is it, because it is in the main one of master and slave, it has to be abolished before something better and finer can be built. Because we would free ourselves from many of the demands made by our own lower nature, the benefit to humanity, ourselves, would be incalculable. And I hope you can hear the echoes going back and forth here between the early vegans in their definition and where Jay is bringing in the tradition of Ahimsa. And of course, they, being from the vegetarian society at the beginning, were influenced by Ahimsa. And so these two poems braid beautifully. J. Dinshah, service, the S in Ahimsa. I see service to humanity, nature, and creation as three things. Service in the sense of a social justice movement, humanity, right? Service to nature, so environmentalism, and service to creation. So we see animal liberation as it is applied to be, as Ahimsa applies to veganism, we see social justice, environmentalism, and animal liberation. The path of Ahimsa opens new doors to creative service, to altruistic and unselfish living, and to devoting oneself, ourselves, to helping make this world a better, more reasonable, and harmonious place to live. Very end of Veganism Defined, we see integrity reintegrated, integrity from Ahimsa. In a vegan world, the creatures would be reintegrated within the balance and sanity of nature, a great and historic wrong whose effect upon the course of evolution must have been stupendous would be righted. The idea that our fellow creatures might be used by us for self-interested purposes would be so alien to human thought as to be almost unthinkable. Finally, last letter in Ahimsa, advancement of understanding and truth, which is exactly what we're doing tonight. To know is not enough. Knowledge must be understood, not just swallowed, but digested, assimilated, put to good use, to the deed, right? Our perception of facts may change in time, as with the good old flat earth concept. We know now that since the Copernican revolution, that we're not in the center of the universe. And Ahimsa through veganism tells us again, we are not the center of the universe. We are not the master. We may not know absolute truth about all things, Practically speaking, we apply Gandhi's measure that truth is for each individual what one's still small voice within says in guidance, according to the individual's respective development. We must size it up also against the eternal measure of the golden rule before translating our relative truth into action, into the deed. It's J. Dinshah, The Pillars of Ahimsa. For veganism is, in truth, an affirmation that where love is, exploitation vanishes. 1951. The Pillars of Ahimsa. Abstaining from animal products, harmlessness with reverence for life, integrity of thought, word, and deed, mastery over oneself, service to humanity, nature, and creation, advancement of understanding and truth.
Lee, thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful and such a wonderful tribute to Jay's work and in such a creative way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Jay Dinshah, and happy birthday. It's a pleasure to get to know you.
As we've now gone through and heard from our four panelists, I want to just put out a data point, which I think I know some folks in the audience certainly would find impressive. And I also find very impressive. So collectively, our four panelists collectively duration of years being vegan total 175 years, which is just an extraordinary, powerful data point, certainly for me, and just shows that, you know, this is a way of life that is sustainable and under which one can flourish and have for many, many years. So I want to, before we kind of pivot and use Lee's beautiful presentation to look ahead together, I want to just comment something that came to mind when Lee was speaking, informed by a conversation we had with the panelists before we came online on the topic of the state of Ohio. Victoria just returned from there. I was on a call with someone yesterday from Ohio, and what came to mind as Lee was speaking and presenting, the work of one of the great, in my mind, one of the great sons of Ohio, Professor David Nybert, who's a sociologist, Ohio native, and teaches at Wittenberg University in Ohio. And he speaks to the fact that as a fundamental, to boil down in essence, his work, his research is with regard to speciesism, exploitation of other animals by humans, as being the foundational expression of the hierarchy and domination that informs the ills, the challenges that we face as a society today. I think his work is just so profound in that regard. So what that says to me is that veganism is foundational to our collective liberation from the myriad challenges that we face as humankind. It is absolutely a cornerstone. And I think that for me, and I'm going to go, back to our panelists, that we must elevate veganism as such, as being foundational to a consistent and coherent anti-exploitation stance that we need to bring to the world in order to preserve life on Earth. It's really at that level of significance. So I guess we'll start now. We'll go back through our panel in reverse sequence. So I'll ask Saurabh to comment on the pillars as you see the pillars being applied to 21st century vegan advocacy, and any other related comments you'd care to share. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Philip. And just is the audio okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I just want to start out saying that Ahimsa is such a powerful principle and practice, and it's timeless and far-reaching to every aspect of life. It's a fundamental part of several of the world's great religions for thousands of years, including Jainism, which is the one I was brought up in. So I think utilizing that as the basis for veganism makes perfect sense to me. And I was thinking about it in terms of individually, but also organizationally. And individually, people come from different experiences and perspectives, really all walks of life, and their approaches can be very different too. And that can be a good thing because people, whom we're trying to reach, just are so diverse. And this generally speaks to finding ways for us to be inclusive and encourage diversity within our movement. Also, organizationally, organizations come in all shapes and sizes, and especially their approaches. And I see the Pillars of Ahimsa as a helpful guiding frame. So just going through the principles very briefly. And let me just see if the audio is okay.
We had a little bit of a chop, but I think we're okay now.
Okay. Let me try and continue. I hope we can phase. Okay. So really each of the 6 letters, and the first one is abstaining from animal products. I think this is important because it really talks about animal products overall. And it's all animal products that I looked at this. And so really the message is go vegan and nothing shy of that, and promoting a clear vegan diet and lifestyle. And I know there are different approaches, and people will sometimes talk about some animal products being treated differently and better than others. But I think this is really speaks to going vegan and really eliminating all animal products in our lifestyles, in our diet and lifestyle. Harmlessness with reverence for life. Um, it's actually fine and important for us to engage with people and to challenge the status quo. That's how I see this. We have to do so thoughtfully and boldly and respectfully. So by respecting people, we can work with them and help people be more informed so they can choose better for themselves. So I think that's the harmlessness with reverence and the dynamic, harmlessness that we see in AVS's writings. And integrity of thought, word, and deed, this is essential because it really gives us credibility and builds trust. When we're making people aware of things that may be truly difficult or even shocking to them, we have to act with respect and with diplomacy. The truth is on our sides. We just have to convey it in a way that empowers people to make those important choices. Integrity is absolutely vital. And then this term of mastery over oneself, I think it's also being measured and respectful, but being firm in our conviction. We don't want to ever have that feeling or perception of being holier than thou. And so it does speak to humility, and it's mastering ourselves. And we know that a lot of the issues of the world stem from within, our minds. And so we have to really overcome our shortcomings and weaknesses. And this idea of service to humanity, nature, and creation, this is really a calling for each of us to do whatever is possible within whatever our capacities are, the gifts that we have, and that's individually and as far as organizationally too. And this is also sort of that traditional basis for people, the planet, and the animals. We often talk about veganism. I think this is captured beautifully here. And finally, in terms of advancement of understanding and truth, it's really about seeking the truth, being open to it, truly understanding what the truth is from its many facets, and then living that truth. And in this case, you're also promoting it. And that's what I think is the essence of the term dynamic harmlessness, because it has to be done not in a passive way, but in an active way, which is dynamic. So I think AVS has a very important place in our larger vegan and animal rights advocacy movement. It has such history and depth, especially utilizing principles like Ahimsa. And therefore, the executive committee and the advisors can help provide perspectives and a strong ethical basis for various aspects in our movement. And in so doing, the Pillars of Ahimsa can help individuals and organizations navigate their way, whether deciding on, say, movement strategy or how to actually implement programs or campaigns, tackling issues that come up all the time, so much more. So I just want to end by using this term that's often used by Indians, which is Jai Hind or Jai Ho. In this case, I can't think of two better words than Jai Ahimsa. And so Jai in both its perspectives and Ahimsa. So to all of you, Jai Ahimsa. Thank you.
Rob, thanks so very much. Beautiful. And you know, I as Lee had alluded, I am a longtime Buddhist practitioner. So the concept of ahimsa is very important. Obviously, pandharmic religions, as Buddhism is, and I'm just so personally appreciative, given my history, that Jay has taken such a creative approach to the term and, you know, utilized it to create a world system for advocating for the end of exploitation based on species membership and beyond. So thank you so much. Victoria, would you care to share your perspectives? Thanks so much.
Yeah, I would. This has been fascinating and wonderful so far, and I'm sure it will continue to be. The couple of things that I wanted to add were that this is a whole outline of an ethical system. You could take this and claim it as a spiritual path. You could claim it as a life path. You could claim it as your goals in life of what you're striving for. And I do think something that we're lacking in the current movement is that a lot of people very enthusiastically come on board with the abstaining from animal products. And some of the rest is harder because a lot of these have to do with our relationships with other humans who may not be vegan, who may not agree with us on other things. And I think if you look out in the outer world, obviously, we're really at a crisis in our inability to be able to communicate with one another. But for us as vegans who are really trying to enlarge this scope of compassion to include all beings, we can't skip over the people that we don't like to get to the cows and the pigs that we do like. And Jay brought this out so clearly that sure, you can be vegan and you can save animals, and it's a wonderful thing if all you do is pillar number one. But to really have this extraordinary life that veganism promises, then the rest needs to be brought in. So I would love to see these pillars widely disseminated to every kind of animal rights and vegan organization out there, to all of the influencers online who've never seen these and don't even know what it is. But if you just look at the list without any of the editorializing, just the lines themselves, the abstinence, harmlessness, integrity, mastery, service, advancement, that's something people can keep in their heads because everybody likes an acronym. And I would just love to see these pillars out in the biggest possible way. The other thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of community and solidarity of our movement as a whole is that Jay brought in the health. And lots of times today we think, well, there's vegan and then there's plant-based and never the twain shall meet. But what you find most of the time is that if people come to this for their health, they almost always get to the animals eventually, because when you're no longer supporting the system, then you can start to see the evils of the system and you don't have to blame yourself for that because you're no longer supporting it. So Jay was a very avid natural hygienist. That's now the National Health Association. And he I don't know if this was consistent, Freya, but as I knew him from the outside, he ate very abstemiously and was really trying to promote the health as well as the ethical aspect of veganism. He told me once that in his view, natural hygiene was the flip side of veganism, because if we weren't healthy and we went out there in the world with our great ethical message and people would look at us, fainting and falling over from, weakness, that we would have a lot less powerful message. And I think as we try to bring more people into this movement, as we try to shine our light in such a way that people will want to take a closer look at this way of being, I think that one great place to start would be precisely where Jay did, and that is with the health side of our movement. And when Jay was doing this, we have to remember that those people on the health side were usually not vegan. They were usually vegetarian and had beliefs about fruits and vegetables and things. But the idea of being completely vegan was something really that Jay brought to them. So in our current situation with the plant-based folks, they're already dietary vegans. And some of them don't want to use the word vegan because, there seems to be baggage attached to that. And yet with Jay's approach, there's no baggage. It's just, we've got the whole package. We've got a great way to be human on this earth for as long as we have to be here. And then we have this wonderful ethical way of life that will save the lives of the innocent and hopefully save this planet. So I think if we can go forth with a, how do we say it, Dinshahian message of promoting this holistic kind of veganism, it could really enrich the movement.
Wonderful. Victoria, thanks so much. And I could not agree more wholeheartedly with that approach. And I noted really disseminating the pillars throughout the movement to really indicate that this is holistic and a path, a self-contained path, brilliantly conceived. So couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. Freya, would you care to share your thoughts on the pillars and how they can influence and guide the current vegan movement?
Well, as I know and you know and many people know, it's not easy being vegan. And with the pillars, this gives us the strength to follow the ideal that we want to. So in that way, I think it's really very helpful. As vegans, and knowing the potential of veganism, that gives us hope for the world. I'm sure there are many people who don't have much hope right now with various things that are happening with global warming and other bad actions happening around the world. So I do find the pillars very strengthening, and we print them in the magazine every issue. So it's good to read it. I know people read, some people read our magazine from front to back. In the front, you will find the definition of veganism. In the back is where we explain Ahimsa and the Pillars of Ahimsa. So whether you read from the front to the back or from the back to the front, and if you read it from the middle on out, take some time to read the pillars, think about them, and make it part of yourself. And we'll all have a better world. Thank you.
Beautifully stated, Freya. Thanks so much. Wow, I'm just in such gratitude to be in community with folks talking about this crucially important framing that Jay gifted us on his birthday. Just so grateful. Before we turn it over, I was going to open up to Q&A to the audience, but I thought I'd just take a minute and ask if any of the panelists might care to share a comment or question with one another before we opened it up?
I have a question for Freya. When you came to America at 18, did you think that you and Jay might get married and that you might be an expatriate and change your whole life? Or did you just come for a trip and the rest unfolded?
We actually got engaged before I came here and met him. And a lot went into those letters back and forth. Jay would write pages and pages. And when he wrote a letter, he not only put the date on it, he would put the time that he was writing. And sometimes that was 2 a.m. that he was writing. But he was very sure about the things he believed in. And I was much more exploring, and I could go this way or that way. But I owe a lot to Jay because, because of him, I didn't experiment with things like smoking and drugs and other things that, at that age one could easily have done. And it just seemed, well, there weren't, many people around with the right thinking. Who else were you going to find who shares your values and you can make a good life with? So that's why we got married.
Thank you. I'm glad you did.
Hear, hear. And again, the inaugural event in the vegan ethics series of the American Vegan Society. In closing, I just want to thank from the bottom of my heart the panelists. This has just been so enlightening and enjoyable at the same time for me, and I hope for others as well. And a special announcement for the folks who have proximity to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Tomorrow evening at the American Vegan Center in Old City, Philadelphia, we will be staging a birthday celebration for Jay that will run from 5 to 8 p.m. In Old City, again, at the American Vegan Center. The address is 17 North 2nd Street in Philadelphia. To any and all who can make it to join us, please do. We're going to have a really fun time. We'll be playing records, including some of Jay's old records and hearing some recordings. He was a disc jockey as a younger man, I'm told. Some of his favorite desserts and celebration of his birthday will be served. We'll have a wonderful time and really hope anyone who has the ability to join us will do so. Again, tomorrow evening, Friday, November 3rd, from 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern. With that, I will close by again thanking my panelists. It's just been wonderful, so generous to your time, and look forward to the next installment of the vegan ethics series. And please do visit the American Vegan website. There's a wealth of information. It's americanvegan.org. Hope many of you will come join us tomorrow night, and hope to see you all again soon, either in person or online. Thanks so much to everyone. Good night.
Night. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Keep well.